What happens when a woman tries to destroy what's been in a family for generations? She thought she had all the power until nature reminded her who's really in charge. What happened next left the whole neighborhood speechless. They say no good deed goes unpunished. I used to think that was just something bitter folks said when the world kicked them around a little. But let me tell you something, once you've lived through a Karen experience, that quote starts sounding less like a joke and more like a prophecy. And me? I walked straight into mine with an open heart and a smile, holding a dog in my arms and a cup of hot coffee in the other. Dumb, right? It was 7:03 a.m. I remember the time because the birds outside my bedroom window were doing their usual morning gossip and my old Labrador, Duke, decided to join them, barking at nothing like he was running for office. I pulled on my boots, stepped outside with my coffee, and gave the air one good inhale. Sweet pine, fresh dew, and the faint smell of motor oil from my neighbor's busted-up lawnmower. Smelled like home. Now, let me tell you a little about my place. I live on a half-acre just outside a gated community that swears it's luxury, but honey, all the gate does is keep the nonsense in. I got this land from my father, who got it from his father, and right in the middle of it stands Big Joe, a mighty old oak tree that's been in our family longer than running water. That tree's older than disco, Motown, and my second marriage. We don't touch Big Joe. We respect Big Joe. So imagine my surprise when I heard whimpering by the fence and saw little paws poking through the slats. That's how I met Buster, the Shih Tzu who'd somehow wedged his fluffy behind between my fence panels like a marshmallow stuck in a toaster. He was shaking like a leaf, little eyes big and watery. And without thinking twice, I dropped my coffee, got down on my knees, and gently pulled him free. That's when she showed up. "Excuse me? What do you think you're doing?" I looked up, squinting against the sun, and there she stood. Hair sprayed to the ceiling, nails like talons, and wearing a zip-up fleece that screamed, "I run this street." This was Karen Lawrence, the new neighbor who'd moved in 3 months ago and managed to file 7 HOA complaints in her first week. "That's right, 7. I'm helping your dog," I said calmly, brushing off my hands. He was stuck in the fence. "That's not my dog," she snapped, stepping closer. "That's my tenant's dog. And that fence is HOA property." I stared at her. "Not, thank you. Not, are you all right?" Just accusations straight out the gate like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. I stood up slow, brushing the dirt off my jeans. "Well, your tenant's dog almost got himself hurt. I just did what anyone decent would do." She gave me this look like she was smelling expired milk and crossed her arms. "That tree," she said, jabbing a manicured finger toward Big Joe, "has branches hanging over my yard. That's a safety hazard. I'm filing a complaint." I blinked. "You're standing here watching me rescue a dog and your takeaway is the tree?" "Yes," she said with a tone that could freeze boiling water. "You people think you can just ignore the rules. Now hold on." "You people?" My jaw tightened. My palms itched. But I didn't say what I wanted to say. Not yet. Instead, I smiled the kind of smile that says I see what you did there and said, "That tree has stood longer than both our houses. Ain't hurt nobody." Karen huffed, flipped her sunglasses down, and stormed back to her porch like she just won a trophy. Buster yipped and scurried after her. Poor thing. I thought that was the end of it. I was so wrong. 2 days later, I came home from the grocery store to find a truck parked on my lawn. Not next to the sidewalk. Not in the easement. On my lawn. 2 men in safety vests were unloading a chainsaw and ropes. "Excuse me," I called out. "Y'all lost." The taller one looked at a clipboard. "You Mr. Harding?" "Yeah. What's going on?" "We're here for a limb removal job. Tree overhang on 45C. Got authorization from the HOA. I froze. 45C? That was Karen's lot. My gut did a slow, painful twist. "Who told y'all to cut my tree?" "Karen Lawrence. She said it's endangering her roof." I nearly laughed. Her roof? That tree wasn't even close to her house, not unless you bent geometry like it owed you money. But the HOA had signed off, apparently, and she had filed the right papers. I walked around the house to where Big Joe stretched his arms gracefully over the property line. Yes, one limb barely extended a few feet into her yard. And yes, technically, by local ordinance, she could trim her side. But what I saw made my stomach drop. They weren't just trimming. They had wrapped ropes around the entire limb, the largest one at that, and were preparing to take it all the way down, including part of the support structure that kept Big Joe balanced during storms. "No, no, no," I said, stepping between them and the tree. "You can't take that one. You cut that and the whole thing might come down." The crew chief sighed. "Sir, we have a signed order." "I don't give a signed beanbag. That's my family's tree. You cut that limb, you destabilize the whole structure." Karen came outside then, sipping from a tall glass like she was watching a tennis match. "Oh, come on now," she called. "Don't be dramatic. It's just a tree, for heaven's sake." I looked at her. Something about her smug little grin and the way she leaned against her porch railing like it was a throne, it boiled my blood. "You know what's funny?" I said, voice calm but tight. "If that tree ever falls, it's coming down on your living room. Not mine." She waved a hand. "Not my problem." "Oh honey, you don't even know how wrong you are." Over the next 72 hours, things spiraled. The crew cut the limb. And just like I warned them, Big Joe started leaning. Not by much. Not all at once. But like a proud man with a bum knee, you could see it in his stance. Every gust of wind made him sway just a little more to the left. My left. Her right. I hired an arborist to check the structural integrity. He came out, looked at the cut, and whistled low. "You're in trouble," he said. "That limb acted like a counterweight. The center of gravity's gone. You either reinforce this fast or it's gonna fall." I asked what that would cost. He told me the number. I laughed, then almost cried. So I did the next best thing. I called the HOA, filed an official grievance, and requested an emergency hearing. You'd think that would help, right? Nope. At the meeting, Karen sat at the far end of the room like a villain in a courtroom show, legs crossed, pearl necklace gleaming, acting like she had just invented oxygen. "He's exaggerating," she told the board. "That tree has been a nuisance for years. It blocks the sun from my tomatoes. I'm entitled to sunlight." Entitled to sunlight. I opened my mouth, then closed it. What do you even say to that? I pulled out the arborist's report, the photos, the receipts. I even played a video clip of the crew sawing too deep into the trunk. But none of it mattered. The board nodded politely, thanked me for my concerns, and moved on to the next agenda item, repainting the community benches. And that's when I realized this wasn't about a tree. It never was. It was about me. Karen didn't like me from the jump. She didn't like how I kept to myself. Didn't like that I fixed my own car. Didn't like my dog, my boots, or the fact that I dared to exist without her approval. And now she was using the system, one filled with old boys who sipped from the same teacup, to tear down the one thing my family had passed down for 3 generations. I stood in my yard that night, looking at Big Joe's wounded trunk. The wind picked up. The branches creaked. A storm was coming. Not just in the sky, but in this neighborhood. And something told me Karen had no idea what she just started. What happened next changed everything. You don't want to miss how this turned, because what came crashing down wasn't just a tree. Let me tell you something about storms. They don't always start with thunder. Sometimes they start with silence. The kind of silence that creeps under your skin and settles into your bones like the cold you didn't see coming. That's the silence I felt the morning after the HOA meeting, standing in my own yard, watching Big Joe sway like he knew his days were numbered. I tried to keep myself together. Lord knows I did. I called every number I could find. City arborists. Legal aid. Environmental agencies. Even the local news, though they didn't return my calls. "We're focusing on community highlights this week," the voicemail said. Community highlights, huh? I guess saving a 90-year-old oak from corporate HOA madness didn't count. But you know what did count? A sudden citation notice nailed to my fence the next morning. Tree hazard must be removed within 10 days or owner will be fined $2,500 per week. Signed HOA compliance officer. Now if that ain't a slap to the face with a velvet glove. They didn't even bother mailing it. Just walked onto my property like it was theirs and stapled it to my fence like a warning sign. You ever been disrespected before breakfast? It hits different. So I did what any self-respecting man would do. I called a lawyer. And that's when things got real interesting. His name was Marcus. Young brother, sharp as a tack, voice smooth as a vinyl record, and glasses that made him look like he could out-argue the Constitution. He sat across from me in a tiny law office sandwiched between a payday loan shop and a dry cleaner. Real grassroots operation. He listened to my story, nodding slowly, fingers steepled like he was praying for patience. "So let me get this straight," he said. "They trimmed your tree without permission, destabilized it, then fined you for their own mess?" I nodded. "And now they want me to pay to remove it." He leaned back, exhaled hard. "You're not crazy. This is what they do. They weaponize bureaucracy. They know most folks can't fight back, so they just keep pushing. Can we sue? We can try. But HOA boards are tricky. They hide behind bylaws like roaches behind a fridge. You'd have to prove negligence, malicious intent, or that they violated their own process." I blinked. "And did they?" He grinned. "Oh, I intend to find out." Finally, a ray of hope. But you know what hope feels like in a rigged system? Like a flashlight in a tunnel with no batteries. 2 days later, I came home to find Karen standing in my yard. Not near it. Not across the street. In my yard. Hands on hips. Phone in hand. Smiling like a kid who just got the last piece of cake. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying real hard to keep my voice calm. She pointed at the tree. "Just checking the angle. You know, to make sure it won't fall on my house. Which, by the way, your insurance would have to cover. Just so you know." I stared at her. "You mean the house you endangered by cutting the support limb?" She shrugged. "It was within my rights. You should have trimmed it yourself." "Oh, so it's my fault you sent lumberjacks to butcher a historic tree without even knocking on my door first?" She smiled sweetly. "It's not personal. It's just policy." See, when folks say it's just policy, what they really mean is I can do what I want and you can't stop me. And that's when I realized something. Karen didn't care about the tree. She didn't care about safety. She cared about control. The kind of control that comes from having power and knowing the system backs you up even when you're dead wrong. But I wasn't about to roll over. I spent the next week gathering every piece of evidence I could find. Photos, videos, drone footage, thanks to my cousin Jamar, who flies drones for fun and side money. We even found an old HOA memo from 3 years back that said all structural tree removals must be pre-approved by the board and property owner. Boom. But the board wasn't moved. At the emergency hearing, Marcus laid it out plain. Clear. Professional. This man's property has been vandalized under the guise of compliance. You approved a cut that endangered his tree, and now you want him to bear the consequences of your mistake. Karen rolled her eyes. The board chair, a pale man named Richard with more gel in his hair than dignity in his heart, simply said, "We followed procedure." I stood up then. Tired. Angry. Done. You followed a lie. That tree was fine until she had it chopped up like firewood. Now you want me to take the blame? They didn't answer. They never do. Because silence is how systems protect themselves. Not with truth, with shrugs and signatures. I walked out of that room feeling like I just argued with a brick wall wearing a tie. And the worst part? The sky was turning gray. Big Joe creaked in the wind that night like he knew something was coming. So did I. That storm hit 3 days later. Biggest one in 5 years. The kind of storm that makes you sit up in bed and say a prayer you haven't said since high school. Rain slammed against the windows. Wind howled like a choir of angry ghosts. And in the middle of it all, I heard the sound. Crack. A sound so loud it shook the picture frames on my wall. I leapt out of bed, heart pounding. Threw on boots, grabbed a flashlight, and ran outside in the rain like a man chasing his own ghost. Big Joe had split. The cut limb had finally destabilized the core, and the whole upper section, bark, branches, and decades of memory had leaned right over that flimsy little property line like it was reaching for payback. And where did it land? Karen's living room. I stood in the storm, water pouring down my face, flashlight beam trembling in my hand, and I saw it with my own eyes. Half her wall gone. Curtains flapping like surrender flags. A chandelier twisted like a broken spine. And in the middle of it all? Karen. Standing there. Mouth open. Eyes wide. Drenched in disbelief. I didn't say a word. Just stood there and let the rain wash over me while she screamed into her phone. Probably dialing 911. Maybe her insurance. Maybe her mama. Who knows? But in that moment, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel victory. I felt truth. Because sometimes nature delivers the justice man refuses to give. This is the turning point. Everything you've waited for, it's happening. Don't miss what comes next. Because what falls after the storm is more than broken wood. There's something surreal about watching someone who thought they were untouchable suddenly realize gravity applies to them too. Karen stood there in the wreckage, soaked, barefoot, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. One half of her house was still standing, all polished floors and accent chairs that nobody ever sat in. The other half looked like it got in a bar fight with the forest and lost badly. Her living room, the one she used to parade guests through like it was an art gallery, now had Big Joe's upper limbs resting politely across her ottoman like a tired guest. Chunks of drywall scattered across what was left of her rug. A family photo frame, cracked but still upright, sat next to a broken lamp and what looked like a decorative bowl of lemons that had rolled halfway to the kitchen. Let me say this, I didn't celebrate. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I watched, because I knew exactly what was about to happen. 15 minutes later, flashing lights filled the street like Christmas came early. Fire trucks, police cruisers, code enforcement, Even the HOA compliance officer showed up like he was qualified for something other than pushing paper. Karen was sitting on a folding chair with a blanket around her shoulders like she was some tragic movie character. She pointed at me when the officer walked over, voice all high-pitched and trembling. "It's his fault. He said the tree would fall on my house, and then it did." The officer turned to me, average height, mid-40s, looked tired, like he'd rather be anywhere else but there. "Sir," he started, "we need to get your statement." I crossed my arms. "Sure, but before I do, can I show you something?" I led him to my porch. Under the overhang, nice and dry, was a thick manila folder. Inside, copies of every document I had, arborist reports, photos of the damaged limb, video of the tree crew Karen hired, a signed HOA memo that showed the cut was approved without my consent, and emails, yes, emails, between Karen and the HOA talking about how a strong wind might do the job for us. "Yeah, she really said that." He flipped through the papers, slow at first, then faster. His eyebrows kept rising like they were trying to escape his forehead. After 5 minutes, he looked up at me and said the one sentence I didn't expect to hear that night. "We'll need to talk to her again." Now look, I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't over. But for the first time in weeks, the air didn't feel so heavy. Maybe, just maybe, somebody was finally listening. They questioned her for over 30 minutes. Karen's tone went from, "Poor me," to, "How dare you," to, "I want to speak to your supervisor real quick." The officer's face stayed neutral, but I could tell by his body language, he wasn't buying it anymore. HOA tried to intervene. Richard, the chairman with the gelled hair and gold cufflinks, came out of his car with a folder of his own, ready to defend his queen bee. But when he saw the officer holding my evidence, his confident little strut slowed to a stiff, awkward shuffle. Now you'd think they'd issue an apology, maybe acknowledge some mistakes. But nah, this is HOA land. Apologies are like unicorns out here, rumored but never seen. Instead, Richard asked me to remain professional while they conducted their own internal investigation, which is HOA code for, "We're gonna drag this out until you give up." But I wasn't giving up. Not anymore. See, that night changed something in me. I used to be the kind of guy who'd just shake his head and move on. Fix my fence when someone knocked it down. Cut my grass an inch lower when they complained. Smile through the nonsense because it was easier than confrontation. But when Big Joe hit that house, it felt like every moment I let things slide finally caught up with me. So I made some calls. And this time, people started answering. Local news showed up 2 days later. Not the big national crews, but that sharp little evening team that loves a juicy neighborhood dispute with footage to match. They pulled up with cameras, mics, and questions, and baby, I gave them everything. They interviewed me by the tree stump. I wore my father's old denim jacket and spoke from the chest. "I tried everything," I said. "I went through the channels. I played by the rules. But the rules don't work the same for everyone." They asked me what I wanted. I looked straight into the camera and said, "I want accountability, not just for me, but for everybody who's been silenced, fined, or pushed out because they weren't part of the right clique. This is bigger than a tree. This is about power." Phew, that hit. The story aired that night at 6 p.m. By 8:30, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Friends, neighbors, old church folks I hadn't seen in a decade. Even my high school shop teacher. "You said what we've all been wanting to say for years," one woman texted me. "Thank you. That meant more than I can explain." "Karen?" Oh, Karen wasn't taking it well. See, she thought she could control the narrative. She was used to being the star of the HOA's little stage, always the victim, always the voice of reason. But now she was the face of arrogance on local TV. And people had opinions. The next day, someone taped a handwritten sign to her garage door. "HOA stands for harassing our area." I didn't do it. I didn't have to. The community was waking up. Now don't get me wrong, not everyone was on my side. Some folks still whispered behind my back, said I should have just let it go or not made a scene. But those were the same people who used to nod politely at Karen while hiding their trash bins behind bushes to avoid fines. Me? I was done hiding. And so was Marcus, my lawyer. After seeing the footage, the storm damage, and the news segment, he called me the next morning. They messed with the wrong one, he said. We're going public. Press release. Civil suit. And maybe even something federal. The HO has stepped in it and we're not letting them off the hook. That afternoon I stood in front of Big Joe's remains, still majestic, even in pieces, and something in my chest settled. Not peace. Not yet. But purpose. See, I didn't just want a win for me. I wanted every person who'd been bullied, fined, or disrespected by the system to know you don't have to take it lying down. You don't have to stay quiet. You don't have to stay small. And sometimes when they cut down what roots you, you grow stronger somewhere else. You think it's over? Not even close. What happens next hits harder than any storm. Stay with me, justice has a long memory. They say when a storm clears, you get to see what's been washed away and what refused to budge. After the night Big Joe dropped half his weight into Karen's living room, the entire neighborhood woke up like someone poured cold water on their dreams of control. The next morning, I walked outside expecting the same silence I'd gotten used to, the kind where folks peek through blinds but don't say a word. But not that day. That day, people came out of their houses. One by one. Some crossed the street. Others just nodded. A few stopped to talk. Heard you on the news, said Mr. Terrell from down the block. Used to ignore me at HOA meetings like I was the help. About time someone stood up, murmured Ms. Evelyn, who once told me my porch paint was too urban. Even the high-strung lady with the poodles, the one who filed noise complaints when my nephew played jazz outside, gave me a slow clap when I passed her by. Something had shifted. But it wasn't just the neighborhood that felt different. It was me. I used to think keeping the peace meant shrinking myself. Not making noise. Not causing waves. Be easy. Smile. Shake hands. Say yes, ma'am, even when your gut says this ain't right. But the moment that tree cracked through Karen's cathedral ceiling, something inside me snapped loose, like a knot that had been choking me for years. And I wasn't choking anymore. Now Karen? She didn't take the fallout well. Her insurance company stalled the claim, citing external negligence. Apparently, they'd read the arborist report too. Remember that email she sent about hoping the wind takes care of it? Yeah. That kind of language don't sit too well in legal files. Her HOA allies backed away slowly like they didn't even know her name. Richard? He resigned for personal reasons. Funny how personal reasons pop up when the heat gets real. And Karen? She stayed in a hotel across town for weeks. Eventually, I heard through the grapevine she put her house up for sale. No one bought it. Not yet. Because nobody wants to live in a place where the walls remember. But don't think I sat around twiddling my thumbs while she faded from view. Marcus, my lawyer, moved faster than a hot rumor. We filed suit against both Karen and the HOA, property damage, negligence, unlawful decision-making, and targeted harassment. And the best part? We weren't the only ones. Turns out, once the news aired, folks got bold. Other residents, folks I never spoke to before, came out the woodwork. They fined me $500 for planting tomatoes. They said my front porch chairs were a visual violation. They threatened to evict my elderly mother over an unapproved flower bed. One by one, they joined in. Our case grew teeth. And the media? They loved it. Local turned national. National sparked discussion. Are HOAs out of control? Can neighborhood power become abuse? Is the system broken or built that way? We went from a silent war in one backyard to a national conversation. And I was right in the middle of it. But fame wasn't the goal. Respect was. And justice. And healing. Because while all that legal noise was buzzing, I was out back, clearing away the remains of Big Joe. It wasn't easy. Each branch felt like letting go of a memory. My granddad's laughter. My mama's porch songs. The way Duke used to nap in its shade. But I didn't bury those memories. I honored them. I called a carpenter local brother named CJ. Real craftsman. Together, we made something from the fallen wood. A bench. A tabletop for my dining room. A carved plaque that read, "Rooted. Broken. Rebuilt." And I planted a new sapling right where Big Joe used to stand. Not to replace him, but to remind me and everybody else that growth don't end just because something falls. 6 months later, the case was settled. The HOA issued a formal apology and paid damages. Karen? She avoided court by signing a private settlement and agreeing to a permanent neighborhood ban. She couldn't live in or own property in our zip code ever again. I never saw her after that. But sometimes when I hear a branch creak or wind rustle through the yard, I imagine Big Joe giving me one last chuckle. Told you I'd handle it, son. And let me tell you, nothing in this life feels better than standing tall in a place that once tried to bend you. So here's what I learned through all this. Silence doesn't protect you. It isolates you. Compliance doesn't earn you peace. It just delays the fight. And roots? Roots will break concrete if they're strong enough. That's what I became. Unshakable. Now folks stop by just to talk. Ask how I handled it. Some just want to sit on the bench. I let them. I tell them the whole story. Every detail. Every laugh. Every insult. Every piece of the journey. And at the end, I say the same thing every time. Don't let anybody cut down what grounds you. And if they try, plan again. Louder. Because sometimes when systems fail you, when people doubt you, and when the world wants you small, the boldest thing you can do is grow anyway.